Hi, welcome to this latest episode of Lightboard Lessons, and today we're going to talk about the DNS processing order on Big IP. We've actually had a lot of videos on DNS where John's talked about DNS Express, and I've talked about load balancing algorithms, and Peter has talked about, what is DNS in the first place. And so rather than talk about each independent feature, what we're going to do is talk about how Big IP handles all of those features as it goes through Big IP. And so if we start with clients over here, and so whatever the DNS client is, whether it's a direct client like your phone or your laptop, or whether it's an LDNS server making a call, that's going to come into Big IP at some point. And so we'll just have a nice long line for Big IP with all the services that are going to go in here. And then of course, after the Big IP, we will have some set of DNS servers sitting back here, and however many servers that ends up being. And so DNS servers. So when it first comes in, the client. So of course this whole thing is our Big IP, and the first thing it's going to do is it drops into like if you have hardware appliance, the hardware DDoS is going to look at that traffic. IP intelligence is going to look at that traffic. After that pre-processing is done, then the first thing it's going to look at is IP, and for DNS, can I write UDP, or if it's TCP, because traffic for DNS can be TCP or UDP. So it's going to validate IP, UDP, TCP, that those are actually valid protocol packets for those protocols. And then when you have a DNS profile attached to your listener, so that could be at the LTM side, a DNS profile for GTM, it would just be a GTM listener. That's going to now do DNS protocol validation. So, is this a legitimate DNS packet? And then we're going to take a look on the way in. So we'll break this up into kind of two directions. And so we're going to look at, on the way in, we'll look at iRules. Oh, that's not very good at that angle. If I had more width on this board, I could write horizontally, but there's a lot to write here. So the iRules on an LTM perspective. So for the DNS profile attached with a local traffic manager, it's going to look at local traffic iRules related to DNS traffic. So the DNS request response events on an LTM virtual server. That's what's going to happen there. And then you have DNSSEC, and I'm just going to DNSSEC. And so that's going to apply. So any kind of a key information, that's going to be handled at that point. And then we have both in then we actually have GTM, and this is F5 DNS, but the daemon on the system, GTM. So your wide IP, that's at the point to where GTM gets involved. And so if you have listeners on GTM that are listening for particular FQDNs or alias FQDNs, that is being taken care of there. And so any of the IPv6 to 4 related to GTM is being handled there as well. And with GTM, and so that not confusing, there are GTM iRules as well. And so whereas the iRules that are attached to LTM are specific to the local traffic manager, GTM iRules exist within the GTM daemon, and they're different. There's different availability of commands at the different levels. Like data groups are not supported in GTM iRules, and then there's some availability information related to GTM pools that is not available to LTM iRules. And so you might have different purposes for using both or one or the other. But that's where GTM iRules are established. And then after that comes DNS Express, and I'm just going to X that, DNS Express. And also any 6 to 4 related to DNS Express happens there. And so what, John explained DNS Express, but that's essentially, if you have a little thing over here to your DNS servers, your authoritative domains, if you want to offload the load from those servers, you can do a zone transfer into DNS Express, and then it's going to be authoritatively answering for all of those records. And so the zone transfers happen there. DNS Express takes care of that. Then after DNS Express, you have DNS Cache. And get that in there. Sure. So DNS Cache and Resolver, I'll put the Resolver in here. Resolve. Okay. And so Resolve actually comes out here to the internet. And so caching and resolving, this is actually for loads that are not necessarily the records that you are authoritative for. So if you have internal resources or even external resources that you allow to be your system to be a cache resolver for, it'll go out and look up like DevCentral.f5.com, and then it can resolve that to external resources and cache it for you. And then kind of right there in between, I'll say last act. Your last act. And so this is like your, if there's an unaccounted for query at this point, what is your action going to be? And so, you can drop it, you can refuse it, or you can allow it. And when you do an allow, of course, that's going to continue onto the path. A lot of your DNS 6 to 4 accompanied with your LTM NAT 6 to 4, that's all addressed here. And then finally, within the TMM, you have your DNS load balancing pool handling. And so that happens here after everything else. And so if you had set, so I'm going to kind of draw a line in the sand. This is big IP. And so on the Linux side of the house, you have bind. Okay, and so anything set, or if the last action is set to anything except allow, you'll never get the bind anyway. And so you're only going to get the bind on the Linux side if that's set to allow. And so if you're not using that, don't configure it. You could even disable it. But the action here does nothing to the state of whether or not the daemon is running. And then so that's kind of the way in. On the way out, you also have iRules and DNSSEC, but they're kind of reversed. So iRules happen here on the way out. So if you want to do anything, if you want to manipulate the response in any way before you send it back to the client, after all of this request action is done, they finally have an answer. You want to inspect that answer. Are you happy with that answer? Yes, move on, or no, you can change it. And then, of course, DNS sec on the way out, and then you're back to the client. So there's an article on support.f5.com that details this in words, and I will link that in the article. So thanks for joining today, and we'll see you out there in the community.